Welcome to CB5, a personality assessment based on the 5-factor model of personality. CANOE. CB5 is an implementation of the Big 5 model of personality. The Big 5 factors of personality are 5 broad domains or dimensions used to describe personality. The 5 factors are C. Conscientiousness, A. Agreeableness, N. Negative emotionality, O. Originality, and E. Extroversion, and therefore CANOE. The Big 5 model is a data-driven research finding. Identifying the traits and structure of human personality has been one of the most important goals of psychology. The Big 5 were discovered and defined by independent researchers like Digman, Goldman, and Costa and McRae. These researchers began by studying known personality traits and then factor analyzing hundreds of measures of these traits in order to find the underlying personality factors. After you have taken the online test, you would have received a report, and today we are going to talk about this report in detail. Your report will tell you more about your personality based on how you answered the questions. Your preferences have been mapped on these 5 scales, CANOE. This report is meant to help you to increase your self-awareness and also sensitize you to people who have preferences which are different from your own. And therefore, CB5 becomes a valuable measure of personality differences. Now let's look at your CB5 report. Some few pointers, notes before you read your report. The CB5 report is based on a normed questionnaire which you answered. This means that your preferences are matched against a large group of responses and generated by comparing your preferences with this data set. This report describes your behavior preferences on the Big 5 factors or scales. The 5 factors or scales are conscientiousness, that is how one works towards one's goals, agreeableness, how accommodating one is with others, negative emotionality, how one deals with and responds to stress, originality, how open one is to new experiences, and extroversion, how much sensory stimulation one can deal with. Your preference on each of the 5 scales or factors of the Big 5 are mapped on a continuum or a line with a smiley placed in the region that indicates your preference. It does not indicate how well you may be performing tasks or how successful you are. Above each scale are remarks describing left, centric, and right-sided preferences. The description indicates the behavior in that region of the scale. Mind you, there are no good or bad positions or areas or regions or sides on the 5 scales. A left-sided, centric, or right-sided preference by itself is not good or bad. In a context or a situation, it can be interpreted to have positive or negative implications. Your behavior preferences will predispose you to naturally perform some tasks in certain situations as compared to others. It is possible that you behave differently from your preference while performing tasks due to a variety of reasons. This report is developed to assist you to heighten your self-awareness. We recommend that you introspect and determine how your preferences will help or hinder you in your interactions with others. We also hope that your preference on the scale will help you to understand and determine why others behave the way they do. It is possible that with your heightened self-awareness, you will become more sensitive to other personalities and understanding individual behavior differences. Do keep in mind that your total personality is a combination of your physical self, your intelligence or ability, your knowledge and skill, and your experiences along with your behavioral preferences. In a nutshell, CB5 will give you an objective insight about your behavior preferences in comparison to others. It does not tell you about your performance. That is, it does not tell you how much or the quantity or how well or quality or how much success you will get due to your actions. C. Your preference on the C scale is a measure of how one works towards goals. It does not measure how much work you do, the quantity of work, or how well you perform tasks, the quality of work. A is a measure of the manner you engage and accommodate others. N is about the measure of how one deals and responds to stress. It is a measure of how soon one gets into a reactive mode. O, your preference on the O scale is a measure of how open one is to new experiences. And E is about how much sensory stimulation you can deal with. Let's look at the C scale. As I said earlier, C stands for conscientiousness or goal focus, how one works towards goals. If you look at the blue continuum below, it talks about the left-sided preference, the right-sided preference, and the middle preference. What your preference is indicated with the smiley. The left-sided preference is about being spontaneous, the right-sided preference is about high task focus, and the middle preference is about situational task-based focus. Someone with a left-sided preference like yourself on the C scale will prefer the spontaneous, unstructured way of doing things. You tend to approach goals in a casual manner. For you, being flexible is more valued than being planful. Performing tasks in a structured way tends to be draining or energy consuming. Managing deadlines could be a challenge. Achieving a goal may either depend on your ability, skill, and talent, or due to someone in your environment creating the discipline for you to perform. You may be perceived by others as distracted, unorganized, unproductive, or irresponsible. We looked at the left-sided preference. Now let's see how someone with a right-sided preference on the C scale will behave. Someone with a right-sided preference on the C scale prefers the structured and disciplined way of doing things. They are more organized, more planful, highly driven, and would prefer to take one task at a time. Someone with a centric preference on the C scale will sometimes prefer the structured and sometimes the unstructured way of doing things. Some situations they'll be comfortable with deadlines, and some situations they'll be more comfortable with unplanned activities. The scale stands for agreeableness, or how accommodating one is with others. If you look at the continuum in blue, it talks about the left-sided preference, the right-sided preference, and the middle preference. The left-sided preference is someone who's a challenger. The right-sided preference is someone who's a harmony seeker. And someone with a middle preference is a negotiator. Someone with a right-sided preference like yourself on the A scale would tend to seek harmony while interacting with others. Even in situations where you assert yourself, you would be comfortable to give in to others' wishes rather than challenge them. You could therefore be perceived as shy, docile, or less assertive, or a person who gives in to others' demands. Your preference also indicates humility and comfort in addressing others' needs over your own needs. Now let's look at the left-sided preference. Someone with a left-sided preference on the A scale would like to engage and challenge others. He or she would be most comfortable in confronting others, in arguments, and would generally be very assertive. Someone with a centric preference on the A scale would in some situations appear as a challenger and in others be comfortable to play along without confrontation. N scale talks about negative emotionality. That is, how one deals with and responds to stress. If you look at the blue continuum, it talks about the left-sided preference of being unfazed, the right-sided preference of being very reactive, and the middle preference of someone who's situationally reactive. Someone with a middle preference like yourself on the N scale may respond to some situations in a calm manner and some situations in a reactive manner. You may also feel some stress and tension, especially in crisis situations. You will in many situations be able to move into problem solving once the initial urge of reactivity passes away. In some situations you may not feel any stress at all, while in others there is a greater sense of tension and therefore the need to react immediately. Someone with a left-sided preference on the N scale has the propensity to absorb a large amount of stress or stimulus before reacting. They are normally calm, cool, and others might perceive them as being insensitive. Someone with a right-sided preference on the N scale will get into a reactive mode in most situations. Even a small stimulus will be sufficient to trigger an angry, anxious, or a tense response. The O scale talks about originality, or how open one is to new experiences. The blue continuum again talks about the three preferences. The left-sided preference is about someone who's grounded in reality. The right-sided preference is about someone who's in a dream world. And the middle preference is about someone who's practical. Someone with a left-sided preference like yourself on the O scale likes the real world. What you see is what you get appeals to you. You will be realistic and practical while performing any activity. You will find change unnecessary unless there is a real need. You will therefore be risk-averse and will like to stay away from the unknown. You will be attracted to tried and tested and traditional ways of doing things. You may also find yourself comfortable performing repetitive tasks. You will be known as a pragmatist with feet well grounded in reality. Someone with a right-sided preference on the O scale will believe and live with the philosophy, change is the only constant. He or she will be highly imaginative, have a big picture view of things, and would generally prefer complexity. Someone with a centric preference on the O scale will be a mixed bag of realism and ideation. The E scale looks at extroversion, or how much sensory stimulation one can deal with. If you look at the continuum below, the left-sided preference looks at low stimulation or stillness, and the right-sided preference is about needs sensory bombardment, and the middle preference is more situational. Someone with a left-sided preference like yourself on the E scale likes minimal sensory stimulus. This would therefore translate into a preference for quieter places, doing things on one's own, no or lesser interaction with people. You could also feel very tired after being in situations with a lot of sensory stimulation. You may be perceived by others to be an aloof, quiet, introverted, and a private person. Someone with a right-sided preference on the E scale will derive energy from a lot of sensory stimulation. He or she will tend to be more talkative, lively, outgoing, and sociable. Someone with a centric preference on the E scale prefers a moderate amount of sensory stimulation. At some times prefers to be on one's own and at some times likes to be with people. We hope that this presentation on the CB5 report works to your benefit and sincerely wish you all the success. If you haven't already taken the CB5 test, register now on www.cb5.in. It's free of cost. Take the CB5 test and heighten your self-awareness.